Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving into an event that literally changed the course of the 20th century, the Battle of Stalingrad. Fought between 1942 and 1943, this massive clash between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union still stands as the largest and deadliest urban battle in all of military history. It's just a staggering story, really. It takes us from this grand, macro-level military strategy playing out across the vast Russian steppes, all the way down to the micro-level of desperate, visceral human survival inside the rubble of a completely destroyed city. It's a story of incredible scale, devastating destruction, and the absolute pivotal turning point of World War II.
Okay, let's dive into this. We're going to break this immense historical event down into 5 distinct parts. First up, the strategic prize. Second, Case Blue begins. Third, Hell from Above. Fourth, house-to-house combat. And finally, the turning point. Let's get started.
So starting off with Part 1, the strategic prize, the global stakes of 1942. To really grasp what happened at Stalingrad, we actually need to zoom out for a second and look at the global reality of the war at this specific moment. Picture the spring of 1942. The German war machine is facing a massive crisis. They are desperately running out of fuel. Adolf Hitler himself literally declared that if he didn't secure the oil in the Caucasus region, he'd have to liquidate the war entirely. And this sets up a fascinating clash of strategies. Hitler makes this cold, calculated plan for a summer campaign to push deep into the south, grab that vital oil, and block the Volga River transport artery by taking the highly symbolic city of Stalingrad. But over on the Soviet side, Joseph Stalin was absolutely convinced the main attack was heading straight for Moscow again. Because of this fatal miscalculation, Stalin prioritized defending the capital, leaving his southern front dangerously exposed right as the German hammer was about to drop.
Which brings us to Section 2. Case Blue begins and the push to the Volga.
With Stalin looking the wrong way, the German military unleashes their massive summer campaign in the south, codenamed Case Blue. And the sheer speed of this advance was devastating. In May, a Soviet offensive at Kharkov fails disastrously, leaving that whole region highly vulnerable. By late June, Case Blue officially launches, and the 6th Army and 4th Panzer Army just sweep across the empty steppes with lightning speed. By July, they reach the Don River. And then by late August, the German war machine crosses the Don and arrives right at the outskirts of Stalingrad itself. In just a few months, the fighting was brought directly to the city's edge.
Moving into Section 3, Hell from Above, starting on August 23, 1942.
Now we leave the grand maps of the steppes and go right into the city itself. Because the devastating reality of this battle didn't start with a quiet infantry march, it started from the sky. 1,000. That is the sobering number of tons of bombs dropped by the German Luftwaffe on August 23rd alone. It was the single most intense aerial bombardment on the Eastern Front up to that point. That relentless bombing completely obliterated at least 90% of the city's housing, and what makes it even more tragic is that Stalin had actually prevented a lot of civilians from evacuating, thinking their presence would encourage his soldiers to fight harder. Instead, tens of thousands of innocent people were killed or wounded in the rubble. Almost instantly, the entire city was transformed into a jagged, burning ruin.
To try and comprehend that level of destruction, listen to this visceral, first-hand perspective from a Soviet female soldier who had just arrived at the city. She said, "I had been imagining what war was like, everything on fire, children crying, cats running about, and when we got to Stalingrad, it turned out to be really like that, only more terrible." Wow, it just perfectly captures the sheer chaos and the total collapse of normalcy. Citizens and soldiers alike were stepping into an absolute nightmare. This leads us to Section 4, House-to-House Combat, the descent into hell. As the German ground forces pushed into those bombed-out ruins, the entire nature of the battle fundamentally changed. You know those famous mechanized blitzkrieg tactics the German army relied on? They were completely neutralized by the rubble. It degenerated into this vicious, claustrophobic, house-by-house street fight. And the sheer desperation of the initial Soviet defense was just staggering. You had NKVD workers' militias thrown into combat, often sent into battle in their civilian clothes without even having rifles. Meanwhile, over at the Stalingrad tractor factory, workers were assembling T-34 tanks, leaving them unpainted with no gun sights and driving them straight off the factory floor to fire point-blank at the enemy. And maybe most incredibly, the 1077th Anti-Aircraft Regiment, whose crews were made up of young women, found themselves lowering their anti-aircraft guns to engage advancing German panzers shot for shot before finally being overrun. It was a chaotic, desperate stand for survival.
General Vasily Chukoev, the commander of the Soviet 62nd Army tasked with defending the city, really anchored the mood of this period with a profound quote. He remarked that incoming soldiers would say they were entering hell, but after a day or two in the city, they'd realize, no, this isn't hell, this is 10 times worse than hell. The unimaginable horror of the close-quarters fighting meant that incredibly violent battles erupted over single buildings, places like the Univermag department store or a warehouse they dubbed the nail factory. Soldiers fought for days inside pulverized walls, choking on brick dust and dying by thousands just to capture a few yards of territory.
And that brings us to our final section, Part 5, the turning point, encirclement and surrender. By mid-November, the Germans had pushed the Soviet defenders into these narrow, agonizing strips of land right up against the Volga River. But as winter set in, bringing temperatures tens of degrees below freezing, we need to pull back and look at the macro level again. While the Germans were bleeding themselves dry inside the city, the Soviet High Command had secretly amassed a massive reserve force right across the river. On November 19th, they unleashed Operation Uranus. This was a brilliant, massive, two-pronged Soviet counterattack. But here's the kicker. Instead of attacking the hardened German forces inside Stalingrad, the Red Army targeted the much weaker Axis flanks. These flanks were being guarded by less equipped Romanian, Hungarian, and Italian allied forces, and they were completely overrun. In a matter of days, the two Soviet pincers met, effectively trapping the entire German Sixth Army inside the very city they had just conquered.
The tables had turned with devastating finality. Now, Hitler explicitly forbade the Sixth Army from attempting a breakout. He demanded they hold the city at all costs, promising that the Luftwaffe would resupply them by air, an effort that failed miserably. Trapped in the freezing Russian winter, the German troops were reduced to starvation, disease, and total despair. Finally, on February 2, 1943, exhausted, entirely out of food, and with absolutely no ammunition left, the remnants of the Sixth Army surrendered. It was a monumental moment. It was the very first time one of Hitler's field armies had ever capitulated.
The crucial takeaway from this entire conflict is captured in the staggering, almost incomprehensible human cost. The Axis forces suffered over 800,000 casualties. They effectively destroyed entire armies and bled their war machine dry. On the Soviet side, fighting literally for their very existence, they suffered an astonishing 1.1 million casualties. Combined, we are talking about roughly 2 million human beings killed, wounded, or captured in a single, drawn-out battle. But strategically, this immense sacrifice permanently shifted the momentum of World War II away from Germany. From this point on, the strategic initiative belonged to the Soviet Union. Which leaves us with a pretty profound final thought to consider today. Is Stalingrad shattered the myth of Axis invincibility? How did the brutal lessons learned in its rubble dictate the remainder of the Second World War? The sheer total war demonstrated here, where entire populations are mobilized, where cities are reduced to ash just to deny the enemy a foothold, and where industrial production collides directly with human flesh, it really set the tone for the long, bloody march to Berlin. It is a stark reminder of the ultimate costs of absolute conflict. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. The echoes of Stalingrad are still heard today, and understanding what happened there is absolutely key to understanding our modern world.